Welcome to another conversation with a swoon-worthy service provider. This is Sarah Mackin, and she is the founder and proofreader extraordinaire of Final Pass Proofreading. Also, under a pseudonym, which she is not going to share with us, an author of fiction in her own right. So, Sarah, welcome to this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, can you share what inspired you to become the Typo Knight? And I'm calling you the Typo Knight because of your logo on your website and launch Final Pass Proofreading.
Absolutely. So I was always that annoying kid back in elementary school who you didn't like because they were always the one like pointing out to the teacher, like, Miss, is the date supposed to be the next day? Or like, is that word supposed to be like that? Because I would just always notice these little things. And for years and years, I never actually thought that it was something I was good at. I just kind of thought that it was something that nobody else cared enough to like mention, or that people just weren't taking enough time to like look over, like when we were doing group projects. I just figured, oh, nobody else has time to look over the grammar stuff. I'll just do it. It's fine. And then years later, one of my friends in the indie author community who I'd, done some casual proofreading for, he started telling me, just like poking me, like, hey, you're really good at this. You should maybe let me pay you. Like you're great at this. You should start a business. Sarah, start a business. So after several years of prodding, I finally took the plunge and I started Final Pass Proofreading, and it's been pretty okay so far.
Before you became a proofreader, you had a different career, which I think when I learned about your career prior to being a proofreader, it really clicks that this is going to be an area in which you would excel. So you just want to take a second and tell us where you were working, what you were doing before becoming a proofreader.
So I was actually a registered nurse. I graduated in May 2019, which is fantastic. I got my first nursing job in September 2019 at like a large New York State teaching hospital. And then 2020 happened. So, which kind of explains why I didn't stick with that career long term. I stuck with it for 2 years. It was just too overwhelming a lot of the time, even after the initial waves of COVID came down, because we really did just keep seeing, especially in my hospital, like every time the holidays happened, we would get another surge, and it just became too much.
Right.
But it also did really help to kind of hone my like attention to detail and my proofreading, because you're dealing with medications that you're giving to patients. I'm the one sitting there triple checking every single medication bottle, like, okay, let me make sure that everything is exactly correct. Let me make sure my charting is exactly correct in case it gets brought up in a lawsuit someday. Not that I ever did anything where anybody would sue me, but sometimes you get documents pulled in for someone else. So
Yeah.
that was just very good at holding my attention to detail even more under highly stressful circumstances, which
That,
was not fun at the time, but it kind of has been a plus overall.
wow. Wow. Yes, I can absolutely see how that would be a transferable skill that one might not immediately connect. So, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see authors make when they try to proofread their own novels?
I would say the most common one is just not giving yourself enough time after you finish each draft. Because once you finish a draft, your brain is still very much in the depths of it. Like I can kind of tell you that every time I finish one of my own novels, by the time I hit publish on that thing, I am convinced that it is the worst thing that has ever been written by humankind. Because I've read it so many times. I know like every single iota of the wording. I know all the plot twists. Like all the funny banter is no longer funny because I wrote it months ago and I've just been staring at it. So when you're in the depths of your story, it really is hard to see the trees through the forest. So if you basically are like, okay, I finished this draft, I'm gonna order my proof copy. It takes 2 days for it to get here with Amazon Express shipping, and I'm just gonna give it a quick proofread and press publish. 2 days really isn't enough to let your brain almost forget about all the wording and to forget about everything that you had seen. There are actually optical illusions that you can look at where it'll have the word and at the end of one line and the beginning of the next line. And 90% of the time you're reading this and your brain will automatically cut out one of the ands because it recognizes, oh, that's a mistake. So your brain
Right.
is trying to be helpful, but that's not helpful when you're trying to proofread. And
Yeah.
the longer you can let that draft sit, especially the last draft, the longer you can let it sit, the more likely you are to pick up on the little errors that you might not have noticed before. Ooh, you could tell the rain is getting bad by my house now. My light just flickered. Hopefully we stay on.
Hopefully we stay on. Okay, well, you've just made me think of something that hadn't occurred to me before, and I don't know if I intuitively do this or not. So my background is as a technical writer, and so I would be writing content, submitting it to my client. I would proofread before, but it didn't have to be perfect because there were always iterations and drafts and sometimes big changes, sometimes small. But when you were saying, just talking about different drafts, do you recommend that authors actually do some level of proofreading between drafts? Or like, I'm just trying to conceptualize whether or not there's a way to turn that into a process that we can follow so that we are better at providing clean drafts to our editors and our proofreaders.
Absolutely. My thing is always first draft, don't even bother. If there's a typo there that's really gonna bug you, just on a psychological level, get rid of it. But otherwise, first draft is first draft. We're burning the whole thing anyway. It doesn't matter. You're gonna change the whole thing. So first draft, don't bother. Then I would say once you get up to the point where you're getting to your beta draft, like whatever you're going to send to your beta reader, or if you're going traditional publishing where you're about to send it out for querying or editing, once you're up to that draft and you're doing that big, larger scale rewrite, I would say like every maybe 4 scenes that you write, the next day when you come back, just reread those 4 scenes and see if you can like spot any issues. Because one, helps you pick out any early typos that you might not notice later. And two, what it also does is it makes it so that you ground yourself in the story again before you start on your next block of scenes. So I always say, with the beta draft, make sure that you're proofreading like every few scenes, like not like an intense thing, just casually reading it over. Usually for me, since I am self-published, once I get that beta draft back, by then it's usually been at least 2 weeks. So I kind of dive in and I do copy editing and usually some proofreading at the same time. And with that, I have Microsoft Word's read aloud feature. I will actually listen to it at the same time as I'm reading it, and that helps to catch a lot of tiny things that I wouldn't have caught before.
Yeah.
And then obviously, like, you got your physical proof copy, you're about to press publish, then it's just the final proofread, catching any last errors that made their way through all of your other passes, like the really tenacious typos, like the ones that you want to almost congratulate for making it this far.
That's so funny. That is so great. So, what is the process that you go through? So, I send you my manuscript. What is your typical process to proofread from the moment you get it to the moment you send it back, my manuscript back to me?
So normally I usually tend to ask for manuscripts in as a Microsoft Word document or a Google Docs document. Mild preference for Microsoft Word just because I like the platform a little better and it freezes up on me less. But what I do is I immediately put it into the track change. I immediately start up track changes. So basically it makes it so that I am suggesting edits. So whenever I edit anything, the person who I am working for, the person whose manuscript I'm reading, they'll immediately be able to see, or I shouldn't say immediately. In Google Docs, it would be immediately, and I imagine that would have to get annoying, which is why I do kind of prefer Microsoft Word. But once they get the manuscript back, they'd be able to see any type of edits I made along with any comments. Because sometimes I'm like, oh, people will use the phrase like honing in on something, like honing with an N. That's not actually the term that's correct. It's supposed to be homing in on with an M, like homing pigeons. But people don't tend to know that. I didn't know that until a few years ago. So usually if I'm making an edit like that, where it's like, this is a very common misconception, I will like link a source. Like, here's what Merriam-Webster has to say on the topic, just so you don't think I'm a moron. But
I love
normally I
that.
get it.
I love that. I love that. I love that so much. I love that so much.
Cite your sources, another thing that I learned in nursing school. But I will immediately start like suggesting the edits instead of just making them outright. And I will basically, since it is someone else's words, I usually can just read through the manuscript like I'm reading a regular novel. I will take care to read it slower than usual. And if I could feel myself getting faster, because if you're writing a good story, like I'm gonna start reading faster. So I will actually sometimes, if I'm like, oh, this is getting good, I'll actually stop and I'll go back a few paragraphs and I'll make sure that I'm rereading it more slowly. Like, okay, I got the cool plot information. Let me make sure that everything is actually okay with the wording now.
That's
And
exciting.
I'll
Now,
just go.
you got to tell me if that happens, when you send back the manuscript with your corrections, do you ever put a cover note and say something like, I got so engrossed I had to slow down? Or do you let the author know, like give them that little hit of dopamine that Yay, I did a good job.
Yeah, I take care not to put like actual feedback because I'm not a developmental editor, I'm not a copy editor, I'm not a line editor, I'm not any one of those fancy editor people. But I will be like, hey, this was really good. I really enjoyed this. I probably would write like, yes, I did have to slow down a bit. But yeah, it definitely does happen sometimes when you get really into it and you're like, oh wait, like I'm reading the words, but am I actually reading the words or am I just letting the movie play in my head? Because the movie playing in my head does not tell me if there are typos.
Correct.
So
Well, and so just backing up a tiny little bit, you mentioned copy editor, developmental editor, line editor. What is the difference between, like, what's the difference between a proofreader and those types of editors as a collection?
So most people don't get mixed up with developmental editing. Most people know developmental editing is like the big picture stuff. Like that's like plot, character arcs, like, pacing, making sure that everything is correct with like, the 3-act structure or the 4-act structure if you use one of those. Usually what people will sometimes get proofreading mixed up with is something like line editing or copy editing, which to be honest, line editing and copy editing, I still don't quite know the difference between them because everybody defines them differently. But those things often get mixed up with proofreading. Whereas something like copy editing is about making your prose clear and concise and readable and making sure that everything really does make sense and that it flows well. So that's kind of making it pretty. Proofreading is actually the step after that. So what I do is I don't change the author's voice at all. Like what I do should be invisible. It shouldn't have any impact on how the author wrote what they wrote. All I'm doing is I am looking for typos, like objective grammatical or spelling errors, any repeated words, any omitted words. One of my friends who I proofread for makes fun of me because you know how sometimes you're typing and it'll come up with like a curly apostrophe and sometimes it'll come up with a straight apostrophe. I always find his straight apostrophes and I'm like, you got to fix those. So I'll find little things like that. And then what I do, like I mentioned, is I use the track changes feature. So basically, it's like the author will see every single change I made. And let's just say that they wanted a grammar mistake in there for some reason. Like if it's in dialogue and they're using a particular spelling error just to show a certain character's background or just sort of the terminology they use, they have the option to completely reject that because I might be wrong.
Mhm.
So what I'm doing, I am the final polish. I'm not making the prose look pretty. I'm making sure that there are no objective mistakes.
Fabulous. Okay, so what do you recommend or what advice would you give to authors who want to improve their own proofreading skills before hiring a professional?
I would definitely say, like we mentioned earlier, definitely give yourself time, especially before like that big last proofread. And what I would say is change the format of what you're reading. Because I don't know about you, but what I do is I write everything in Microsoft Word. So I am staring at the exact same font, the exact same line spacing, the exact same line size. So it makes it so that my brain will almost gloss over what I'm reading just because I'm so used to looking at it. So you could, if you wanted to, you could upload it to Google Docs just to make the entire screen look different. You could have it like as a PDF if you want, although PDFs, not so much just because you can't make immediate changes in the document. But something simpler you could do is always just change the line spacing, change the font and the font size, even changing the margins. Like if you push the margins in instead of having them fully out, because then it almost looks more like a book in your mind. And what I've found is the more like a real novel it looks like, the easier my brain will pick up on errors.
Interesting.
And
So do
then
you
like
do that as well? Do you change the margins when you're proofreading?
I don't change the margins because I usually just always use the read aloud feature. So I'm listening to it and I'm reading it at the exact same time. So if I get something like, oh, predicably instead of predictably, or if I get another common one for me is lightning instead of lightening, just missing that little E in there,
Hmm.
the read aloud feature will pick up on it. Sometimes the read aloud feature is incorrect. Sometimes it will say something like, instead of like bow and arrow, it'll say bow and arrow. And I'm like, wait, was that a typo? No, it wasn't.
Funny.
Um,
Yeah.
I do proofreading before I do formatting, and then I also do it once I have the proof copy in my hands. So for me, that's really the one where it's like, okay, the margins are different now, the font is different now, everything looks completely different. And that's usually where I'll catch like the last few little things.
So if let's say I hire you to do a proofread, so let's say I output the book as a paperback. I use Vellum, so I'll output it as a PDF,
Mhm.
upload it to Amazon, get a proof copy. and then proofread what you have already proofread. Would you recommend that as a final before I upload and make my book a real boy?
I love that phrasing, first of all, but absolutely, because I am also human. I tend to be very, very good at proofreading, but sometimes when I give people's work like a second pass, like say that they send me their manuscript before, and then they also send me an art copy afterwards. Sometimes I will pick up on one or two little things that I missed just because the format looks different. Usually it's not big things. Like I handle the vast majority of it beforehand, but as an author, I would say definitely like read your proof copy or even just I think that there is a like a Kindle formatter preview thing, like so you can preview how your book looks in the Kindle app.
Mhm.
Even just doing that, because that also just makes it into a different format where you can kind of read it with a different font size. It'll help you pick up on any last typos that I might have missed that might have slipped by me. And what it will also do is if you forgot to add in anything or if the formatting looks funky, just to make sure that you hash out those really final decisions before you officially make the book into a real boy.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, last question. If an author is on the fence about hiring a proofreader, what would you say to help them decide? And why should they choose you and Final Pass Proofreading?
So, two questions in one, all good. So, as far as hiring a professional proofreader and making that decision for yourself, there is a level of certain technical skill that you want to have as far as grammar and spelling goes. If you don't feel confident in that, it might be best to hire a professional just for the sake of your time and your sanity, because you can look through stuff. You can say, okay, well, how do hyphen rules work? And you can go on a binge and you can read up on how hyphen rules work. And then you could be like, okay, how do I use like the possessive apostrophes? Like, is it like my mom and dad's car, or is it my mom's and dad's car with the apostrophe on both?
Oh my
Like,
God, what is the answer? You can't
mom,
leave me hanging on that one.
so mom and dad's car would be there is one car that belongs to mom and dad, whereas mom's and dad's car, which would usually be mom's and dad's cars, there would be two cars.
Okay, I just learned something. Thank you.
I'm glad. But sometimes it's just little things like that where it's like, okay, I know that there's a rule about this. Let me go look it up. If you want to improve and you're willing to go and spend the time looking things up online, finding good sources, absolutely go for it. I love it when people get nerdy about grammar. It is my favorite thing, as you can probably tell. But even if you are feeling confident in your grammar skills, you might want to just look at, like, very realistically look at the issue of time versus money, because it is a very delicate balance. Because obviously, hiring a professional proofreader does cost money because it's a service. Whereas this is something hypothetically you can do yourself. And I have done it myself. Was it always the best option? Not always. I have found some typos in my published books, usually only like one, but it still just infuriates me, like on a spiritual level. But if this is your baby that you've been working on for years and years and years, and you've gone through so many drafts, and you can say, okay, I'm going to put this away for like a month, and then I'm going to proofread it. And then maybe I'll even wait another month and proofread it again just to make sure everything looks perfect. Absolutely. If you can give yourself that amount of time, if you are willing to spend the time actually doing the proofreading, if it's like a 250,000 word fantasy epic, might take a while to proofread. It doesn't mean it's not valuable time spent. It just will take a while, and that's the reality of the situation. Whereas if you're the type of person who is trying to rapid release, or if you just feel like my time would be better spent working on my next book rather than proofreading this one that I know is fairly solid, just might have a few errors. That's the case when it really might be more worth your time to spend the money on a proofreader. So it really is a very personal decision. Depends on your finances, depends on your publishing strategy, really just depends on what you want to invest as a writer in this stage, either investing the time to do it yourself or investing the money to hire a professional. Second half of the question, why you should hire Final Pass Proofreading. What I have tried to do, because I know as an indie author, I am trying to compare multiple places. I'm trying to get all the information I can. I'm trying to know how much I'm going to be spending on things. What I did was, okay, your manuscript is 100,000 to 120,000 words. Here's your price. Just flat. no gimmicks. This is what you would pay if your manuscript is between in this word count. So I just want to make it very easy for writers to look at me and say, oh, that's awesome. That fits within my budget. Or, oh, no, no, thank you. I want to go somewhere else. And most of my prices do fall within like that 0.0012 to sometimes 0.002 on like the very low end, just because I have to have some kind of minimum value. So if your manuscript is like a 3,000 word short story, it is a little bit higher per word, but I just couldn't make it for free.
I love that. All right, I actually just came up with one final question. Winnie the Pooh.
Yes.
Tell me about Winnie the Pooh. What
I just
he looks like a mascot up there overseeing you.
he is the king of the kingdom. I do have a lot of plushies just because, I kind of get gifted them over the years. I see Fox plushies, my brain immediately just gets a burst of serotonin and I kind of grab it. But Winnie the Pooh, especially, I had a Winnie the Pooh like that size when I was very, very, very young. That is not the same one because I was stupid enough to sell my original Winnie at a garage sale. And then I cried the whole night afterwards because I realized how moronic that was. So then my dad actually, the next time he was at a garage sale, he saw Winnie the Pooh, he brought me home one. And I have to add, I was not a child at this point. I must have been 15. And I was still very upset about my loss of Winnie the Pooh. So
I
now I've got my Winnie and he sits there. And I like leaving him up there because I feel like that's just a very good value judgment. Because if you look at my Winnie the Pooh and you're like, oh, that's kind of weird, then we might not be the right vibe for each other. But if you look and say, hey, that's a great Winnie the Pooh, then we'll probably get along
I
fantastic.
love that. What a great way to end. I am in love with that. All right. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for this conversation, for sharing great tips for authors who either want to proofread themselves or are considering hiring a proofreader. And thanks so much for being part of the Swoonworthy Services family. I'm so glad that you're here with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Bye.
Take care.